Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for attending the Risk Modeling Advisory Workgroup meeting being held on August 8th, 2023 at 2 p.m. I will now open this meeting with some information for the workgroup. The Risk Modeling Advisory Workgroup will be following the open meeting requirements of the Bagley-Keene. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand. Members of the public can comment on an agenda following member discussion, but we ask that you limit your time. For items not on the agenda, the public will have an opportunity to address the group, but you are asked to limit your comments to 3 minutes. If you are filling in for a committee member, please answer for the person you are filling in for and state your first and last name. I will now take roll call. Jim McDougall?
Here.
Carlos Camarina? Deborah Hobblestadt?
Here.
Neil Matuka? Paul Glushku? Max Mortiz? Nancy Watkins?
Here.
Dave Winokur? Dave, I see you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Robert Marshall?
I'm here, thank you.
Anthony Powers? Yana Valachovic?
Good afternoon.
Chris Ochoa?
Here.
Dory Beats? Terry Woodrow? Joe Irvin? And Carolyn Thomas Jacobs.
Here.
Great, thank you. I only have 8, and I need 9 people. Jim, you're muted.
Because I'm counting. Well, hopefully somebody else jumps on in a minute. Not seeing anybody else either. And Celeste, did you get any confirmation that the folks that wouldn't be joining?
No, not this time.
Do all the CAL FIRE staff not count?
No, it has to
No.
be committee members.
Nick?
I know, right?
Oh,
Count
Nick
those.
Camarota, who do you usually fill in for?
Chris Ochoa.
Okay, that's what I
Yeah.
thought. I just wanted to make
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I was counting Nick too, and I'm like, oh, that's the same one.
Yeah.
We don't have to tell anybody.
Well, thanks for both of you being on.
Anthony let me see if Anthony's going to be able to jump on. Anthony says he can join in about 5 minutes.
Well, everybody doesn't mind. We will give it just a few minutes till we get a quorum and then we can move through the document. Plus, it looks like we got Dory got on.
Yes, apologies, I'm late. It's Dory, I'm here.
We're just absolutely happy you're here because that gets us to a quorum.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry.
Okay, a quorum is 9 people, 50 plus 1, quorum established. Thank you everyone for your patience.
All right. Well, very good. Welcome, everybody. I think if you remember last time, we thank Melissa Simser for being on the committee. And I would like to introduce her replacement, which is Carolyn Thomas Jacobson from the Office of Energy Safety. Carolyn, would you mind introducing yourself to the group? I think many of them know you, but we appreciate it, and maybe not everybody else does.
Sure, happy to. So it's Caroline Thomas Jacobs at the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety. And yes, so Melissa Semser, who was my deputy director, she has since moved on to greener pastures outside of state government as of last Friday. So definitely appreciate all of the amazing work she provided to our department. I will be sitting in, and I'm the designate until we onboard our new deputy director, which actually won't be too long. We will have a new deputy director sworn in next Monday, but I'll do a soft handoff for her of this effort because I know you guys are kind of coming right up to the end of this effort. So we want to make sure we don't have any disconnect on the energy safety side. So happy to be jumping in and filling in at the end here for energy safety on this important effort.
Very good. Thank you so much, Caroline. I appreciate it. Okay.
I like the energy safety disconnect piece. That was funny.
Yeah. All right. Hopefully everybody's had the opportunity to review the agenda. So I'll be looking for a motion and a second to adopt the agenda.
Motion
Nancy
to adopt, Robert Marshall.
Robert.
Second, Nancy Watkins.
Thank you, Nancy and Robert. So motion and a second to adopt the agenda. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing no hands. All those in favor, aye.
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 Any? Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of the past meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
Nancy Watkins, so moved.
Chris Ochoa, second.
Thank you, Nancy and Chris. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, no hands anyway. All those in favor, aye for approval?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you for that. Okay, back to our favorite old business. Celeste, if you'd like to share the document. Hope most of you got an opportunity to read through it. Spent a lot of time towards the end of last week going through it. Celeste cleaning up a lot of the comments that we had discussed. And so my thought process anyway is there's just a few items left in there to discuss. So do we, I know Yana wants to make sure that we get the executive summary cleaned up, because that does kind of affect some of the things very down at the end of the document under the conclusion. We're kind of waiting to make sure everybody agreed on the executive summary, then we were going to clean up the conclusion at the very end. So does that sound about right for folks, if I remember where we were at? Okay. Think so. So you're at the very top, right?
Yeah, Deborah has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, I had the recording transcription over you, Deborah. I just turned that off. Apologies. Go ahead.
No worries. No, I think this is looking really good. First of all, I just want to thank everyone who put in additional time last week, because I think I have a couple of what I believe to be minor non-controversial amendments to some of the language that was inserted last week, but I didn't have access to edit the document until either late yesterday or early this morning. So I haven't put those comments in, but I can do that on the document, or I can do it orally today. But like I said, I don't think that these are going to be controversial at all.
Okay. Let's see here. Well, we can just start, and if they're where we're at, if we just start at the top, then you can just raise your hand or whatever, and we'll grab them as we work down through this.
Deborah, hang on, Jim. Do you need a different
Yeah.
email added to make sure you have access?
You know, I don't know what happened, because in the past I have been able to access it, but yesterday or today, whenever you sent, remember I sent you a message that was like, I
Yeah.
can't access it. So yeah, I don't know what happened there.
Okay. All right. Yeah, because I think I'm just using the same email that you were using before. So I just want to make sure if you need a different email, we get that added into the document. So then that way.
No, it's the same email. I haven't changed email addresses.
Okay. Thank you.
The old technical difficulties. Gotta love it. Okay. So the first one's there, Yana, there's some highlighted items. Yeah, I think Nancy, the word material, I think Nancy has some suggestions there for the group. We want to discuss that?
Yeah, Yana asked, when I saw her comment, complex material and changing fast. It's supposed to mean big. And so I see materiality is it's too abstract and context specific. So maybe significant is a better word. Or we could just leave it out. Those are two different suggestions, which either one would be okay with me.
Great. I just want to make sure I didn't misunderstand what it was trying to say there.
No, if you don't understand what it means, then it probably needs to be redone because you're actually on the work group.
Well, we're all working through it. Yeah.
Okay, so I think, so let's change that to significant, does a little clearer, so that's fine. Kind of the same thing down here, just another one of those for clarity on what we're trying to get across. All kinds of windows open in there, Celeste. Like,
Yeah, so approach is Yana, your comment review for agreement. You mean the words or wait, it's weird. I can't actually see what the yellow highlight, like I can't exactly see where the comments point to. Can you explain what the question is?
Right. So if you recall at the end of our conversation, whatever that was, a week and a half ago or so, I asked the question of, what are we really asking for? Is it a program? Is it a coordinated set of action? Is it a theoretical framework? Like, what is it? And I think we settled on approach. And I just wanted to make sure that that's really what we is as strong of a word as we can get. And I know there are many different layers to the different words we choose here. So it was a chance to just put the flashlight back on it and make sure that we are all in agreement with what we're trying to say here.
I mean, I think integrated approach, that just backing up, the way this was designed originally, which has changed, is that we're trying to do three different things in an integrated fashion: measure risk, communicate risk, and mitigate risk. Modeling is about measurement for the most part. Mitigation is obviously about reduction, but communicating is, in this construct, the thing that happens in between to get people to mitigate, to understand why they have to mitigate, and to do it. And to figure out where you focus your efforts. So it used to be, before there was some editing, a section about measuring, a section about communicating, and a section about mitigating. And if you go down to that thing that says big picture, that was how it was originally portrayed. So it's an approach to thinking about all the things that have to happen. And the word integrated means they have to be thought of in relationship to each other and as a whole. So I guess that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, but I think the point I'm trying to say is, if you hand this to a policymaker, are they saying, do you need to throw money at it? Do you need to throw people at it? Do you need to throw more analysis at it? Like, what is the what materialistically that we're asking for or highlighting by doing this? I mean, I agree that approach feels more like a method than it does a what. And so I guess it's my assumption that the next question, if we turn it in, would be so what are you asking for? Or what is the committee recommending here?
Mechanism, system, framework. I think I started with framework, and I think somebody changed it to approach. I'd say the what has a lot of different answers to it. There's things that can be done by different players in the process. But I think the original point is that a bunch of disparate activities that are not connected are not going to solve the problem. And they might have some impact, but they won't resolve the challenges that we listed above, and they won't really reduce risk at the scale that we need it to. And so in order to do that, we're talking about an overall framework, thinking about it as a framework. And I'm sorry, I'm not really a policy person, and so I'm not like showing up with legislative policy recommendations. And so I'm just speaking as kind of a person who understands how things work that are not political. That you have to think about the whole, all the problems and solve them together in one simultaneously, I guess.
Right.
So is framework a better thing to create a framework?
There's a couple hands there. Maybe I'll
Yeah.
respond afterwards.
Yeah, Anthony, you were first.
Yeah, hi. I think it's like when it comes to this stuff, I think it's not even worth beating around the bush, right? Like just direct. Like I think the word is that we're trying to get around saying is like reform. You know what I mean? Whether it's policy reform and things that like that integrated approach has to include industry professionals in all different facets. Every single else. We'll use the analysis, the data, the models and all that, but we really got to start looking at it from the proactive approach, you know what I mean? And we just need reform. This is a guiding document and what they choose to do with it after, but it's going to take boots on the ground. It's going to take insurance industries to get behind it, and it's going to take homeowners that will cooperate. And so I think this is starting to scratch the surface, but it's going to push into more of a movement, if that makes sense. At least that's how would we measure success, right? We need to have people start doing things and carry out for us the objective and mission that this is going to establish, because it's not going anywhere. It's been slow, it just hasn't gotten started yet, but nationally fires are burning everywhere, right? And so I don't want people getting comfortable. We need to have reform.
Okay, thank you. Caroline?
Thank you. And I know I'm obviously coming into this conversation late in the game. So, Yana, if I understood your comment or question, it seemed like you were trying to get to the how of like what the resources are that would be required to do this work. Did I understand that correct? Because you were talking about like what's the what that you need. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we do really nicely in this document is sort of lay out sort of the complexity of issues, but it doesn't quite land with, we think an integrated team should dive into this. We think a task force should be created. We think a special division under, some public sector should be established. We think money should be put at it. We think that these 17 different policy changes need to be analyzed. We think, it still feels a little light and fluffy. I love the methodological approach, but I think what folks are going to want who are a little bit more lay audience is like, well, what do I do with this really nice methodological approach, and how do I take it to the next level so I can start to make change?
Right.
So if we could get a little farther on that, I think it would have more impact. And if we can't, that's fine. But
yeah, that was what I was sensing you were getting at, and because I think we maybe the responses were kind of focusing in on the word like change approach to framework or to reform, whatever the word. That I don't think that was what the point was. The point is, how is that work going to get done? And so again, I don't want to throw in a wrench at the end of the game here. So but maybe that is somewhere else that question is answered, because I would agree with you that this sentence, the work group proposes the creation of an integrated approach. But Anthony, to your point, where the rubber meets the road is, okay, who's going to create that integrated approach? And that's what we need to make sure is somewhere in this document so that there's a concrete thing that the powers that be that take this document and do something with it have a concrete recommendation to create the how to get that integrated approach or framework or reform, whatever you want, word you want to use there, done. Is that kind of what you're getting at, Yana? And maybe it's that it's someplace else that we say that.
We as far as my read on it, I don't think we say that anywhere else specifically. So, it could be an interagency, multi-organizational team is established that approaches the issue using an integrated, or that
right,
uses an integrated approach to blah 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 blah. That would be more powerful to me. But if we're not there, then we're not there, and that's okay too. If we could push it a little farther, I think we would have more impact. That's all I'm trying to get at.
I support the maybe it's massaging the sentence to include a new phrase that says and I'll just kind of just throw out some words right now. The work group proposes the creation, and I'll just say task force, that will develop an integrated approach designed to do everything else. So maybe it's just the insertion of that phrase on after proposes before what they're creating.
Is there anyone who could live with that or not, or can't live with that?
Yeah, I was gonna ask the same. I definitely get the point of what we're trying to be a little more forceful of what we're doing. Nancy?
I guess when I write an executive summary, I try to have it summarize things that are already in the paper and not come up with new stuff. I don't mind creating new stuff, but I would say that we would be creating new stuff. And so I really don't want that to be interpreted as, I think that's a bad idea. I'm just going to point out that we don't have anything in the body of the text that says we should create a task force as a state and who should be on the task force. We've never had those discussions before. So I did go back and look at what they asked us to do. It's pretty handy wavy. Make recommendations on how to understand and model wildfire risk. And then the rest of it is just discussions and review and information. So I think is there maybe an in between place that we could say we're laying the groundwork for somebody to start with this and then answer Yana's question of what should we do without our group having to go into additional extra innings to hash out what it means to have a task force and who should be on it. And I know I sound lazy, and I'm just going to cop to that. I am worried about pulling a thread and ending up having to reknit a whole lot of sweater.
That does make a lot of sense as well, because we haven't talked about that. I mean, the word sounds nice and it sounds really good, but and I guess kind of to what Jan is trying to wrangle up here too is something like that could be in the conclusion, for example, but to your point, Nancy, we haven't discussed it as what that next thing would be as a group either, right? So I get both points there very clearly, for sure. It's hard to say something in your executive summary when it's not mentioned in the document as maybe part of the conclusion, though. Like, I know that Jana's trying to get the executive summary and then clean the conclusion up too, right? So
I mean, right now this sentence is almost mirrored in the conclusion, and so I didn't touch the conclusion because I didn't feel like we really resolved what we're trying to say here. If you look at the overall document, it's more like, here's the challenges that we face. Here's some detail on some of those challenges, but it doesn't quite lead to the who should solve it, the where it should be solved. It more says, here's a range of information that informs folks that might work in this space, which maybe that's the limitation of our charge.
I kind of felt like it was.
And I think the piece that I struggle with is the proposes the creation. Creation means making something. Maybe the work group, addresses this issue using an integrative framework, or, I think it's the creation word that is throwing me off here.
How about it proposes that future efforts follow an integrated approach or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, creation does promise something that we're not delivering. So I could really see that would work. I guess, I mean, would you feel like we aren't completely copping out? Would you feel like this is bridging the gap well enough?
Maybe it's bridging the gap well enough. I mean, I guess in my mind, if we said the word that, and a task force could be relevant, doesn't mean that we have to say who goes on the task force. It just says like, this is really just, our work is not done. Here's a quick summary of the issues with, some good minds on it, but this is a complex and gnarly issue, and it's going to take some more effort, and it doesn't land in any one department alone, and it doesn't land solely in the public sector. It's got relationships to the private sector. And so, to find durable solutions is going to take some effort.
Mm-hmm. Can we go back to the word framework? Because right now we've got an approach in line 2 and framework in line 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I just didn't touch it because the creation word kept throwing me off, and I'm like, I'm not sure what we're creating here.
Yeah, it's definitely not going all the way. I'll admit, like nobody reduced any risk with this document, or created a new task force or anything. But I think just the art of writing, or the act of writing it down and thinking through it and explaining what all this stuff means and showing it how it fits together, it really has value. So I maybe we're tired of it, but I'm hoping that when other people read it, they'll think, oh yeah, that actually, I never thought about all those different things and how they fit together.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. I think the group, Yana, myself, probably Dave, we have a pretty good head wrapped around with what the group's trying to say here. So do you think Celeste did some editing right there? Do you think that gets it pretty close?
I think that helps tremendously.
Okay. Anybody else have suggestions, comments, discussion around this topic? Okay. Fire suppression.
I had a comment above that may not have made it in so far.
Okay.
This originally said adopt standards. So actually adopting standards for parcel level mitigation, community level mitigation, and WUI fire suppression. And it was edited to say standards for data collection, but that wasn't, I mean, data collection is not what you're achieving. It's just what you're collecting. So this was intended to mean like what kind of standards should be established for what is important, not just like what do we think we should be doing for fire suppression? What should we be doing for parcel level mitigation? And that parcel level mitigation, that's CDI has a Safer from Wildfires framework. IBHS has a Wildfire Prepared Home framework. So a lot of that work has been done, but not on the other levels, WUI fire suppression and community level mitigation. So I guess I would rather get rid of data collection that captures in that first bullet and then leave data collection in the second bullet because it's a different thing. First you have to understand what you're trying to do, and then you collect data on it. And it may not be the end point of what you're going to end up knowing is efficacious, but you got to start somewhere.
So maybe it's adopt publicly understood standards for mitigating. Because I think the hard part is that first part of that sentence is measure baseline risk. And so typically when you measure something, you collect information to measure something. So
Well, the first part of data collection is to decide what you're even
Standard
thinking
is.
about. Yeah, what you're thinking about collecting data on. And so there's got to, like, and fire suppression is not the same as mitigation, but it is a component of risk. So or a component of risk reduction. So we are talking here about some standards for what it means by zone 0. What does it mean to say, like for WUI fire suppression? I don't know, we got 50 fire chiefs on the call that you guys should know some things like what are the things that should be collected, the kinds of radio, the kinds of training, the kinds of equipment, some sort of standards for what we're interested in knowing about. That's the first bullet, is about what do we want to know about? And the second one is we're going to collect data about that, which are two different things. They're two steps in the same thing.
I hear what you're saying. I think I'm still lost on it fitting under measure baseline risk.
Yeah.
I think it's almost its own thing.
Robert has his hand up.
Yeah, Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, two things. First of all, Nancy, it's bold of you to assume that we know anything on our side, but thanks, I think. So I actually didn't understand what was meant by the WUI fire suppression either, but after listening to Nancy, I think what you're actually after is response data, both in terms of what is the historic response data, what have we done in an area as far as, what kind of fires have we had, how big have they been, what kind of damage did they do, but then also response capability would be the other piece. What do we have available to actually respond to those? Because those two things are going to be different. We, for example, a fire department may have had a big fire at some point and then went out and did all the things that they needed to do to improve their ability to respond. So I think there are two kind of different data pieces that go into that. So if we're going to keep this, which I personally think we should, I think that it's good. And I understand where you're going there by trying to say, hey, there are standards. What are those standards? And we do on our side have standards, whether it's NFPA 1730 for the response piece or 1710 for the, or excuse me, 1710 for the response piece, 1730 for the risk reduction piece, the community risk reduction piece. We've got data standards that appear kind of in both areas of the things that we need to collect. So, so I think it's possible to do that and have those standards and identify who's using that. Thanks.
Thanks, Robert. Dave, see your hands up. Dave? No, you're off mute now. Okay.
Sorry, Jim, just making sure I was up.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So I was just writing the intent of the WUI fire suppression comment is as outlined below, that we know fire doesn't spread in the absence of human intervention, particularly when we look at Jack Cohn's stage 5, stage 6 in the WUI disaster sequence, and the specific ability of firefighting resources to disrupt destruction to structure transmission that characterizes urban conflagration.
You're kind of going away, Dave.
Oh, second.
Oh, we lost you there for a second.
Son of a gun. It's all right. I'm in the office and the internet's really expensive. It just doesn't work well. So the point being is that what we were trying to call out there was the need for to recognize the firefighting resources and what they can do to disrupt fire pathways in the structure transmission space. And once we know that, then that combined with the level of understanding of what mitigations have happened on the parcel and what mitigations have happened both through an aggregation of parcels at the community and then the disruption of the pathways leading into the community. So fuel breaks, splats, other mitigations in the halo around the community, and really wanted to understand not just how fire will burn in the vacuum, but how fire will burn in real world conditions, which includes a firefighting component. So think, this is a separate project Nancy and some others and I are working on, but think for simplistic terms of an ISO score for the WUI, so that we understand how likely a room and contents fire is to transition into a structure fire, to transition into conflagration, which we have done in the urban environment for years. This would be a measure of baseline risk, would be a similar comprehensive understanding for the WUI environment as we transition from vegetation fire to the potential for conflagration.
So should the WUI fire suppression just say fire suppression resources?
I don't think it's resources, but I'd more say it's capability, because one of the disconnects in the current environment is that the cap model or level for the reinsurers, they kind of loosely count up the number of fire stations, and they're using that as a surrogate for understanding how effective firefighting might be. And what we really want to transition to, not just for a department, because we don't fight wildfire at a department level, we fight it at a regional level. And so then it would be the quantity. So how good are they going to be at disrupting each of the three pathways, and how long is it going to take them to get there, under what command relationship, so that we know that, say, Kern County is a great example. If you get a fire in western Kern County, the fact that there are Kern County fire engines east of the Sierra Crest is completely irrelevant to how that fire is going to be resolved. But if you're getting firefighters from Oregon under different command relationships, they're not going to be as effective as getting, say, an all LA County response, or all Ventura County response, where it's all underneath the same command and control system. So there's some nuance there. Most of that's broken out later in the report. So I would say, I think this could be clarified. Long way to get to a short answer, which is WUI fire suppression, either capability or capacity, would be the appropriate intent we're trying to convey with this bullet. Or capability and capacity, if you want to split the baby.
Yeah. What if it said adopt public understood standards for maybe effective, and then just left it from there? Parcel level mitigation, community level mitigation, and capability and capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that helps it for sure. Yeah.
So get rid of the data collection that captures, but just say for effective there.
Mm-hmm.
Or impactful or meaningful, or
I like effective or meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's add it effective in there. I think that fixed it for me. I don't know. Anybody else have any comments around that? Okay. Very good. All right. And I was trying to find the older document earlier today and got sidetracked on something else, but I thought there was some items under number 2. Was there some bullet points at one time under item number 2, Nancy?
Yeah, I just saw this version. This used to have 3 pieces where we were talking about measuring, communicating, and mitigating risk. 1, 2, 3. And so that's the way we framed it in the leading paragraph starting to resolve. It's the way the little picture looks, and then we ended up with 2 new things. So this one turned into an orphan, but essentially all the bullets were about under education, used to be under communication. And I honestly think that communicating risk consistently to drive better decisions, it means what it says it means. And all of those things underneath it, understanding the barriers, sending risk signals through pricing, building visibility into public standards and policies, that does communicate risks consistently to drive better decisions. It also educates. I mean, but the point is the word communication needs to show up there. If you want to add on some stuff about educating in the lead, that's fine. But I think what you need is 3, and the 3 are measuring, communicating, and mitigating.
Which is the picture below it for sure.
Right.
Yeah, again, we know how many versions there are of this. I'm not sure. So,
Well, integrate transparency could be moved up to measuring baseline risk.
Yeah, actually, transparency was part of the whole data commons thing. And so that was the point. It's not really an extra step. It's just, it's a feature that's built into a data commons.
But it's a pretty powerful one. I think it's worth not getting buried.
yeah.
Well, it got explained in that next paragraph. And so we could use the word transparency down in the next paragraph. I mean, we're blowing that out as a piece of the puzzle that matters a lot, but I don't think it's a separate step. Like, it's not an action. Measuring risk is an action, communicating risk is an action, and mitigating risk is an action. Integrating transparency is how you're doing those things. It's not a separate action at all. It's definitely a good thing to do. It's just not parallel.
So could elements of 5 get pulled up under 1? And could 2 and 3 get collapsed?
Sure. I mean, I don't understand what 5 is about. Daylighting the data being collected and how it's being, like, we have to really, I didn't write this, so I don't know what what it's supposed to modify. Like, who are the agreed upon modelers and strategy, like who's this, all of those bullets. I don't understand like what they're referring to, and so where they go, it would help to understand who wrote them and what was being thought about. But yeah, you can definitely collapse 2 and 3. I mean, I think 2 is written the way, a sort of a concise way. And maybe it could be to drive better decisions and educate residents and communities. I mean, we could can put them all into one long sentence if you want.
Yeah, or maybe that's just its own bullet in there, right? Educate residents, communities about risk reduction opportunities and priorities. Maybe it's a bullet if we get rid of 3 and move it into 2.
Sure.
Is it a bullet?
That works.
So
Yeah,
what are we
like
doing here?
promote. I mean, Jim's suggestion is to take that continue to educate. And in fact, I think, yeah, just make it into a bullet instead of a number, Celeste, and then put all of that under 2.
Let's see what it looks like here. This is its own version, so we're not messing up the version everybody commented on. So
Okay.
We're not losing anything here.
Yeah, nothing is lost in Google Docs. So the point is education being a separate step, understanding barriers to adoption. Yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. That makes the point, and it does it in the right place.
Yana, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. And I think we really need to think more clearly about the data commons and whether we're really on that track, because I think elements of the new 4 there are part of the data commons. And they're written a little bit more in sentence form, where the other is kind of a little bit more in cliff notes. And so I think it's a little easier to read sentences than it is to read kind of shorthand bullets. So, I think some of the language between the new 1 and the new 4 are common, are in parallel and could be massaged together to make it clearer.
So daylight the data being collected and how it is being used to evaluate risk. So that daylight the data being collected how is that different from having an open data commons.
We don't say
I
that
think
in,
that's the purpose.
it's
Okay.
not stated. So
Okay.
this is sort of laying the framework for the data commons.
Okay, it definitely talks about what data is being collected and used to evaluate risk. In terms of how, that's a completely different question. How is very context specific. You're now down to who's using it, and the whole point was everybody should be using the same data. And if everybody's using the same data, you can't realistically expect that the use cases on how it's going to be used are going to be consistently done, much less communicated or understood. I don't think in any case we were ever forming a risk or proposing formation of one risk model to rule them all. I think we were talking about putting together a database that multiple risk models could draw from, and as well as risk models, decision makers could use them, like fire chiefs could use them to know which parcels to prioritize in their communities. Firewise communities could use them to know how they're doing. There's a lot of things that could be happening from this, not just risk modeling.
Sure.
Okay.
So I think what you're basically saying is the first one is more establishing open data commons to aggregate parcel level data, incorporate large scale mitigation efforts, and provide agreed upon source of data. And then you're also talking about, provide additional transparency into, what information is being used by risk modelers and decision makers or something like that. I'm once again, I'm not sure what additional exposition is wanted at this level. So I'm trying to suggest a way, but I don't know if that's really what you're getting at.
And what if we, and we can do it offline, we can get together, maybe hey, Nancy and, I know Dave wants to work on this, we can take 5 in that last paragraph and make it a little clearer, a little stronger. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. But I think there's some value, let me just throw this out here. Just because you can measure it doesn't mean it's really a driver in how we both mitigate risk or evaluate what's happening in an individual parcel. And I think it would be useful to state something like that right now, because there's a lot of accessible data, but it doesn't mean it's actually answering the question that we need. And so and there also needs to be, there's so many examples of people using some kind of remotely sensed data to evaluate some characteristic. And as a property owner, you have no idea what that data, where it's driven from, and it may be entirely inaccurate, and there's nothing you can do to fix that problem. And so, I think there's some need to have some level of transparency in this, because people need to be able to fix something if it's totally wrong.
Put the word a transparent, agreed upon source of data, because that really is the problem that the data commons is supposed to be solving. I mean, you're quite right that is exactly an issue. It doesn't have to do with weighting or ranking or how models work, but it does have a lot to do with what are you looking at? What do you know that I've done? When did you look at it? Did you see this that I did? Did you see that I did? This is supposed to answer that question, which is about transparency and accuracy as well.
Okay. Donnie, you have any more on this one? We can work on it offline or with a smaller group.
Yeah.
Okay.
It'll have to be this week, unless it's going to be 2 weeks from now.
We'll try to get to it for sure. If you guys have availability in your schedule, we'll check or
Yeah.
Again, it can only be 3 of us, so I don't know. Dave, you want me to work with them or you want to work with them on it? I don't know what your schedule's like.
I'm hammered this week.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I'll get with you. We'll get on your guys' schedule this week here after me. We'll send you something and try to figure out a time we can get together.
That's fine.
Okay. Then we'll bring it back to the group. Does anybody else have any comments or discussion around this item? Okay. Right. Moving down, yep. Get on that one, Celeste. So Yanni, your next one, why is that? I think that's just a formatting error on italics when we moved it up. We just didn't clean it up, so we can fix that one. We get down to the next comments. You got all the notes there, Celeste? We're gonna rework all that, so.
Okay, so we're just gonna, I mean, there's hardly anything left in the
Yeah,
summary, and it all has to do with the same kind of like where do all these thoughts go?
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. The next comment down, I think, is on the next page, Celeste. Yanni just had a comment about in there on it being italics that we can fix. Yeah, I totally missed that when we were going through it the other day. Perfect. Hey, folks, I don't know if a lot of you are happy, didn't put comments in. If not, we can move down to the next one. I know, Deborah, was there something between there and down to page 14? If you had something there?
I don't think so. You know, during some of this conversation, I inputted my comments, so you should be able to find them now in the document. So they started on page 28. So I think
Okay.
I'm solid with this, but thanks.
Okay. I think the next kind of topic for discussion is down to section 3, mitigations that matter. I guess Yanni, you and I kind of went back and forth about it. So I think my concern here was with the language saying mitigations are required across California communities at high and very high wildfire risk. So nowhere in anything that at least CAL FIRE does, there's no statewide risk layer at this point. So I think that current mitigations in at least very high fire hazard severity zones in the LRA and then fire hazard severity zones in the SRA are tied, the mitigations are tied to fire hazard severity zones. So I just think it was cleaning up that sentence for me there to get it more in line with the current requirements in California. And we could even add a piece in there that local jurisdictions could have other requirements too, right? Because some of them do.
Right. I'm a little lost on what I think I was curious about the 50% of structures are lost piece. Component, like it was very detailed in a sort of general way, and then just kind of going back and forth in style there. But it's been a few days, so
I think the number's higher than 50%, but that was which reference that references to.
I think, yeah, so because the point is that, see my note here is like it doesn't really say we're just because of that, it doesn't say we should be doing certain things. So it's an interesting fact, but it didn't really lead to a next supporting sort of statement. I think this paragraph is trying to say, look, we focused on defensible space as being our primary strategy besides the fire safe regulations in terms of ingress and egress and roads. But yet we've sort of been not paying attention to the, the interface and the fact that we're getting into urban environments with our wildfires. And so, the risks are not entirely lessened just because you're within an LRA or you're right in the transition between SRA to LRA. And, the mitigations we're talking about apply to large sections of California. They're not just in a forest land setting. Do you generally agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
If
Yeah.
that's the case, then I think Celeste, if you're okay, you could just put a note that okay to proceed.
That you're going to clean this up? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Anybody else have any discussion around this section right here? Dave, I know you worked on this one pretty heavily, I believe, originally.
Yeah, I think most of that work was down in the section below, which I think we got it right. But I think that the challenge, John and I talked about, is there are a number of different things we're trying to say here. But within the construct, I think we got it more right than wrong.
Okay, yeah, leave a note in there too, Celeste. I think we should add something about, local jurisdictions have things to kind of maybe even more basic, like Giannis said, defensible space, fire safe regulation, some of those other things. So we can clean that up. I think that was just Dave noting when he moved things. I don't think we need that comment anymore, do we, Dave? Okay. Say, wow, Celeste deleted it faster than you raise your thumb. So
At this point, Celeste and I are completely synced.
you are. You guys are thinking the same thing. Okay, so this was a section that Melissa had in here. Dave, do you have any reference? I thought you were going to work on this a little bit, or did you? And is this the right place for it?
Yeah, I think just to clarify, and I didn't want to touch it because I know Celeste was working with Melissa was working with some of you others on this, but this same paragraph is in section 6. So if I'm following it, for those of you that were working with Melissa, feel free to jump in if I'm off. I think you can delete this one and it's in section 6. Dave's giving a thumbs up. So I think we can delete this paragraph. And then we can discuss it as part of section 6.
Okay. Yeah, so it got moved to section 6.
Yeah,
okay.
I saw it in section 6.
Yeah, okay. Perfect. Timber, did this already get taken care of? I don't know if this is a leftover. Because Dave renumbered this whole section, so I'm not sure.
I mean, this is definitely an older comment. It's from June 26th, but I think it may still be worth considering if we want to include like integration with climate models, where we want to put that, if we want to put it at the end, because it's sort of an issue for all types of models, or if we want to leave it here. I don't feel strongly.
Anybody else?
Maybe we
I think
just
once
leave
we
it.
also want, yeah,
It
once
might be
we
better.
also get through all of it.
Yeah,
Go
it
ahead,
might be
Nancy.
better to put it after catastrophe models because it sort of makes sense logically that we've been, everything up until then has been about today's risk or short-term risk. And so to Deborah's point, you know, and it's not like a big change, but I don't think there's anything in this section that you'd want it to be before cat models. I think cat models is it has more to do with the section before it, and so I like her suggestion to move it after.
Great.
Yeah, we're just swapping them around. So
Yeah. And now that you taught me how to cut and paste in Google Docs, like, sky's the limit.
So I think, yeah, I think the next
Did you
comment
get
is
it,
also
Celeste?
for me. And my comment here is under 4.3.4 catastrophe models, the second paragraph where it says outside the insurance context, catastrophe models have been increasingly used by public and private entities attempting to understand physical risk, blah, blah, blah. And so I was wondering if we know of public entities currently using cat models to understand their physical risk, and if that's in California, or if we should sort of limit that. I mean, again, this is like a
Question.
you know, I don't have an example of a public entity using it right now.
I believe the town of Paradise is using it, right?
Yeah. I guess if you look at the bullet points, those were supposed to be examples. So if you think about who determines municipal bond ratings, those are, I think, usually private entities. Investors deciding where to allocate capital, those are usually private entities. Lenders, those are banks and federal, so some public, some private. I think like some of these examples are known publicly, and some are contained in white papers, and then others are presentations that I've been part of, or where I'm not sure if we really want to start putting in a bunch of citations. The point is the model usage has spread pretty hard. I mean, I guess HUD and Treasury, I mean, have put out some information about models that they've licensed. I know that privately, a number of catastrophe modelers are working with federal agencies. FEMA is using CAT models. They've been public with that. So, I mean, if you really want to have a lot of examples, there's definitely a way to start putting them in. If you think that would be valuable, I guess I was thinking we would be sort of adding a lot of detail where we're outside of the whole mitigation thing. And so I didn't put that in, but the point is we're getting into very widespread usage of models to understand catastrophic risk. It's not just for insurance anymore. It's not just for mitigation either. There's a lot of financial decisions being made at the private and the public level. To me, it's a context in information or context reference.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think I'm fine leaving it the way it is currently. I can delete my comment here.
Okay.
I was more like I was trying to understand
Right.
the context there.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, And then yeah, these are all my comments. Okay, so the next one is on the paragraph just before 4.3.5, which is now going to be renumbered. So here it's even so it's important to note that less mature models are not necessarily wrong, even if they disagree. I don't disagree with that, but I do think that it's helpful to have some kind of caveat that projections by any model really can be unreliable if the underlying methodology or parameters or assumptions are unrealistic or lack support. And so I think and not calling out CAP models exclusively on this, but saying like all models are subject to having these sort of problems, and the less mature ones, we need to know what's going into them. So the suggested language is here in the comment.
Don't mind the language. I think it's much more global than less mature models, though. So
Agreed.
It's more global than even catastrophe models. So we have a space about model vetting, and that might be a place to put it, or it might limitations of models. It's, I think, section 7. And it talks, so that's a place to put it. There's another place that's about how you evaluate models. That would be a place to put it, or there'd be way up front, like why we need models. I mean, those are 3 other more generic places that it could go. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think any of those sound good. I mean, I think we could pick this paragraph up and put it into probably the limitations on models makes the most sense to me, but I'd have to go back and I don't have a strong preference.
Okay, so the paragraph being what you've written in your comment, and maybe just copy paste it. We'll stick it down in section 7, and when we get there, we'll figure out if it looks good.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Did we say also the issue of not extrapolating beyond the data?
Not the whole paragraph, just the comment, what she's written, what Deborah's written in the I think the paragraph is okay the way it is, right, Deborah? It's just that you wanted to make that extra point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the I would like to have some sort of caveat alongside the, I mean, I agree with you that it's not just less mature models, and that this question applies to all models. And so I think it makes sense to put that language in with the limitations. But I think I would still like some sort of caveat in this paragraph about less mature models are not necessarily wrong, even if they disagree. Maybe we take that out, since we're gonna address the rest of this in a different section. Let's see.
What I've lost my page. Where are we at?
We're on page. This is page 28.
All right. Okay, 28.
And the second paragraph down. Really, it's important to note that less mature.
Okay, so if you look at the sentence before it, we were talking about variability. The point is, what tends to happen with these kinds of models is they get more usage tends to result in more convergence as outliers get found and noted and corrected. So the sentence is really about variability, which is getting from the, well, what would you say is the right thing to say? There's great variability in results from one model to other. they might disagree. They're not necessarily wrong. They're just different estimates. It's basically like descriptions. Like I describe Jim, Jim's mom describes Jim, Jim's son describes Jim. Like we're all going to give a different description. We're not necessarily wrong. One person may be more accurate about Jim in the context. Sorry, Jim, you're an easy target here.
That's okay.
And
the
context of the description, like his mom might like talk about what he was like when he was a little boy, which, you know, if I was describing what he's like as a leader of the group, it might be very, very irrelevant, but still extremely precise and right. So the point is context matters a lot when we're talking about models, what they were built for and what they're being used for. Would you say that we disagree if Jim's mom says he's impulsive and greedy and I say he's patient and effective? Like, well, she's talking about Jim at 5 and I'm talking about him now. So they might disagree, but the usage matters. And you know, as we're having more and more of these discussions, we get a bigger picture of the situation that we're actually trying to describe, which necessarily we're leaving out a lot of information by summarizing it. So I think that's the point, is for people to not, there's a lot of people who think that if two models disagree, then one of them has got to be wrong. There's no way that they're both right. And they will go to their grave believing that's true. And I think it's actually kind of, it feels self-evident that if two things are purporting to describe the same thing and they don't say the same thing, that they're, and the output is a number, that they're disagreeing, but that actually isn't the case.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I actually think that your example was very good. Thanks, Jim, for being
Absolutely, we're here to work through it. So we'll move that down to section 7 and we'll move on.
Yep, sounds good. So I'll.
Okay.
Do you have this comment? Do you want me to delete it, or do you want me to leave it there for now? I'll leave it just so you have the language.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
we got noted in there to go to bring it up when it gets to section 7. So Celeste has it captured.
So where do we want to move this to section
Well, we'll
7?
discuss it when we get
Okay.
to 7. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Okay. Okay. Yana?
Here, give me a second.
There you are. Yep. Yeah, is there a visual? I don't know. What does I think people don't understand it. I will give you that, right? The way when you get tails, I know in fire hazard severity zones, we've been trying to explain to people what the tail means. But I don't know if there's a visual or an easier way we can make it where people understand it.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Do we want to get rid of the word tail because it's so insiderish and
Yeah, maybe there's a better way to say it.
and just say
It's said
explain it
twice there. I mean, I get it, but I just, you know, when you start trying to tell somebody about something visually and you don't have a visual to explain it, sometimes it gets a little wonky.
Yeah, but if we start putting in a visual, then they're going to have to look at probability distributions, and you start getting into probability, and people, like, the next thing that happens, somebody's going to throw a Greek symbol or a formula in there, and everybody's going to say, okay, I don't want to read this. So how about results in the less probability, the lower probability scenarios, lower probability scenarios. I think people will understand that, right? And then get rid of the upper tail of the distribution is where how about lower probability scenarios? These scenarios are where the most severe losses occur. Does that help? Or these are scenarios in which, or something like that.
And may occur instead of occur, since
Sure,
it's a scenario. These
yeah.
scenarios are which the most severe losses may occur and is where the greatest variance in results and models exist.
Yeah, and get rid of, I'm just going to do it, and is also get rid of that, please. Yeah, you like that?
Yeah, let's see, these models tend to converge and maybe just get a strike for the lower end of the distribution, converge where.
Well, okay, for higher probability, scenarios where, or how about just less adverse scenarios? More likely.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Celeste, is it bothering you when I do that?
Probably not.
No, it's very helpful, actually. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
That if you're doing it like that, that's very, then I can just go in and accept it because I'm the owner of it.
Got it.
Cool.
Okay.
To me, it's like playing solitaire and having somebody looking over your shoulder and going, you could put that red 7 on that black 8.
Ugh. All right. Everybody, no questions? I don't see any comments from anybody. I know this is painstaking, but we are knocking our way through these questions that are left for clarity. So appreciate your effort. So go ahead, Celeste. So this is some of the stuff where Nancy and I move things around. We didn't get any, I don't think there's any. Deborah has something.
Yeah, this is just sorry, I'm eating ice cube. This is just sort of cleaning up some of the language around NEIC and what they're doing. So I would say on the paragraph, so under 4.4.7, right? The second paragraph, I would just delete and leverage catastrophe models. I don't, when we've spoken with the NEIC, they're not really seeking to leverage them. They're just helping folks understand what they are. And then in the last bullet with the catastrophe computer modeling handbook, that's from 2011, which is fine. It still is in existence, but I think it's important to note, this is a little outdated. And I added in a little bit of language there. So published a catastrophe computer modeling handbook in 2011. So they don't provide regulatory guidance in that handbook. What they do is they explore catastrophe computer models and discuss issues that have arisen or can be expected to arise from the use of catastrophe models. So they really don't, they're not providing regulatory guidance. I'd just like to tighten that up a bit, and you can use the language that I provided here. That comes directly from them.
I don't have a problem with that. Do you think it's worth mentioning that they're updating it?
Sure.
Okay. A little bit inside baseball, but so maybe putting a footnote that says it's the last one was published in 2011 and the work group is it's currently being updated. Yeah. I'll put a little comment in there for you, Celeste.
Okay. All right. Clean that up.
So we want to put this here.
We'll work on it. Just leave it there. And
Okay.
Nancy's putting another comment to go with it too, so we can we can work on it. Okay. I think this. Different. Celeste, can you go up a little bit so I can see? Is this right underneath that last one? Okay, Nancy per comment in 4.6, right? Utility.
My
Nancy, is this the one you and I moved around, or is it still in the same place? I think we left it in the same place to talk about this meeting. Am I remembering what our conversation was?
Yes.
And we were thinking it should. I remember what the.
Well, Dave didn't like talking about reducing ignitions and calling it mitigation.
Right.
So we decided we had to figure out where was the best place. We didn't want to stick it in mitigations. It was a little bit of a loose end in challenges and barriers. And so I think we decided to throw it into challenges. Challenging in that we don't know where to put it in our report.
Right.
It's important, but it's not exactly like anything else. We've now hit the limit of my knowledge on this topic.
Yeah, so Caroline, just for your, what some of the discussions that have occurred before, as a group, we think this is important. Where we stick it in the report is a challenge to many of the discussions we've had around this. Nowhere in this document do we discuss ignition sources as being part of risk. And so it's viewed that utilities are an ignition cause, right? Which they are. But there are these weird items that sit out there that you can do mitigations on to reduce risk, but they're not, they're an ignition cause, right? They're not, so they're just kind of this tweener that's floating out there. And we really honestly haven't figured out where to stick it. You know, they do reduce the risk of ignitions. So, you know, maybe we put something in there that way. It's and I know Dave, you have a lot of thoughts about this and you worked with Melissa on it specifically. So I will turn it over to you for maybe some more context for.
I got nothing to add beyond what you said. I think it's just fundamentally different. It's not to say a lot of work hasn't been done and that work isn't likely to have reduced the probability of utility ignitions. But everything else in this talks about risk of two communities agnostic of the ignition source. And I do think just one final point on Jim's excellent summary is that there's a very good science-backed case to be made that reducing ignitions from one source simply carries over the fuel load to ignitions from another source. And that in a hotter, drier future, climate change, et cetera, which we're certainly facing, reducing ignitions today potentially just carries over a fuel load to a potentially worse day in the future. And reduction of ignitions and suppression of fire is well accepted as part of how we got here. So I did have a little bit of heartburn about this in general, but recognizing that a lot of effort has gone into reducing utility ignitions. But if it's going to be included, I think it does need to be called out very distinct from the other mitigations. So we don't, one, start to bleed between the two, and also we don't open ourselves to a question about why do we only include this source of ignitions? Why didn't we include other work that, say, the Forest Service has done with the Smoky Bear campaign to encourage people to douse campfires? And then lastly, my personal opinion, which becomes a false sense of security, that when we tell people that we have done all this work to reduce ignitions, we strongly imply, intended or not, that the ignition reduction work has reduced their risk substantially, and that is often perceived as meaning that therefore less of the defensible space, home hardening, et cetera. A few of the other things are needed since we've either reduced ignition or we've got more firefighting resources in the field.
Okay. And Jan, I know you worked on this too, so maybe you can go ahead.
I'll just say that I think we concluded that it was, more than just a tweener case. It really had some value in something that we could mitigate, and whether it stood within the document or sat as a pull quote, and kind of a little case study on the side, that there was value in incorporating it. It's just that we struggled with where to place it, but it was worth shining a light on.
So just to catch everyone up on terms of the handoff between me and Melissa, she did kind of quickly, catch me up on the conversation. So I had a general sense of what you guys all just discussed there. And my understanding, just in terms of like where we go from here, was I believe she had coordinated with at least a few of you these revised paragraph, this paragraph, and I think there's one other paragraph that I believe there was consensus that this was kind of striking that ground that Yana was just referring to, of calling it out, but not, blowing it up more than it should be given the overall context of the paper. So I guess I'll just ask, is that where it's currently at, or is there still debate on whether this paragraph should even exist?
I think to the point, Jan's, but where does it fit and how does it fit, right? I mean, and to Dave's point, how do we not go down the road of dealing with ignitions, right? So I had thought at one time, and I had said to Melissa, there's a piece up in the models, and the more I thought about it, again, I'm not sure this is a great place for it, but up in modeling, probabilistic models, there's some discussion around the utility model, risk model, right? So I didn't know if it was possible to take some of this language and incorporate it into the why. That was one thought I'd had at one time, or it could completely stand off somewhere else. Nancy, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I think putting it up higher, in just, well, actually we put it in challenges, and that's actually not a bad place to put it. I think leaving it out would be a mistake, because California has focused quite heavily, and that's why Caroline's here, and that's why Melissa was on the group, in understanding how to address the risk of ignition from these kinds of sources. So people, I think, will be confused if we don't say something about it, but maybe if it could be its own little section, and under the risk section where we talk about ignition, or under the modeling section.
So I just want to clarify though, there's a second paragraph that we deleted from up front that's down in section 6, I thought, that has the discussion on the risk part. I just want to make sure we're not conflating two paragraphs.
The six is barrier.
She added two different things, right? There's two different pieces. One of them was adding the models that utilities are using up in the modeling section under probabilistic, and then this piece down here. So those are the two.
Oh, so then maybe my comment earlier, because I thought that someone was saying, should we put this in 6, and then that it was copied. So I just want to make sure.
Yeah, there were some weird notes in there.
Yeah, so let's just make sure, because there's two different paragraphs. I just want to make sure both paragraphs still exist. And I think what you guys are both asking about is, where does each paragraph live? And while I wasn't going to jump in here at the 11th hour and challenge whether it should be in section 4 or section 6, if you guys had decided 6 was a better place, but to Nancy's point, it is talking about the modeling, that first paragraph, and that upper section, I think it was section 4, was talking about models. So I ultimately agree that when we're talking about models is when we should talk about utility models. So I agree with that. In terms of this paragraph, which is, more of what I kind of understood to be sort of, let's call it the outlier paragraph, where it's kind of like, oh yeah, and we should mention this. I think that under challenges, or maybe we even, what's the number under challenges? Maybe there's challenges then, and we maybe even just say additional information or additional note, like a sub paragraph, and then have that paragraph kind of stand on its own. It doesn't have to necessarily be we don't have to necessarily force it into a section that is that it doesn't directly fit in. I mean, we could just give it its own little header.
I definitely like having it kind of called out in its own little header. I think that what I would really want to guard against is any kind of suggestion that every model should now have like a whole ignition component that starts looking at utility assets and infrastructure. Like, I think it's really super important that Caroline, for her operation, models that extensively. I mean, that's because that's what they do. But for other purposes, it may or may not be useful. Like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I wouldn't want to have some implication that this has to be a crucial part of every model that going forward, even though, like, we're including commentary in here. So if it could be like it in its own little box, in like a call out box, like modeling.
Or we could just say something like utility consideration, or something like considerations, or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, Dave, does that get to your original point? So we're not like jumping back and forth in between models that just look at ignition as a piece of the puzzle versus models that are really, really around reducing these types of ignitions.
Yeah, and just the part I come back to. So over the last 30 years, on average, there's 5,478 ignitions per year in California, and so from many sources. And the question I would ask for everyone is do we as a group feel that ignition reduction represents a path out of the current wildfire reality? And at least for me, it's a hard no, which makes introducing ignitions as a source of mitigation problematic, to your point, Nancy, because they may start to, that could raise a question of, if we're calling out the importance of ignition reduction measures, then why aren't we modeling that? Which, if you look at the hazard maps, and at least the risk maps I've been involved in, they all start with the assumption that there has been an ignition. And from then, we look at how fire would spread across the landscape and how we could best mitigate the rapid arrival of high intensity fire at the point of transition into the built environment. And taking out one source of ignition, unless we're taking out other sources of ignition, at least to me, it doesn't cross the bridge to be a mitigation that I would want to model.
Yana? Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, so I appreciate where you're coming from, Dave. I do think, though, there is a tremendous public benefit to be able to control ignitions during critical wildfire conditions when wind is at its worst. I mean, yes, we have a landscape that's in a fire deficit and needs lots of fire, but it would be much better to do it not on a windy day and not when we're at zero humidity. So I think this is one of those cases where we have the capacity, if we manage those utility lines well, to be able to, change and nudge the trajectory so that we don't have catastrophic fire, but we can have fire that, provides a lot of good benefit and doesn't kill people in the process.
Yeah, just a comment, since there's a break in conversation. There's a lot of truth to both, right? I totally understand where Dave's coming from working in the industry, and we do need more fire, but we need fire under our conditions, right? So like pre-planned events and reintroducing fire into the landscape on the terms from a land management standpoint, which is kind of starting to happen. Some areas it's a little bit more complex than others. But there is a big push for that and funding behind it. I think when it speaks to the utilities alone, I remember speaking on it early on in this work group, and it's just an example of that, of what they're doing during critical fire weather phenomenon. You know, when we hit red flag warning, triple digit, heat, and single digit RHs, that's when these big power companies, PG&E, SCE, that's where they then tend to induce so much loss, and we get catastrophic fire. So I think that's a mitigation that's working for them, and I would look at the other the risk versus other ignition sources and what can be done to help prevent them from happening when we don't want to versus more fire when we want it and how we want to do it, kind of thing.
So, Dave, really appreciate your comment regarding good fire and 100% agree with you. But I have to say that in all the work that we've been doing, no one once has ever said that the utilities cause good fire. So I think that there's a little two different conversations there. In the work that we're doing, no one is suggesting that any of the utility caused fires should potentially be leveraged as good fire on the ground. But I 100% agree that in California's landscape, good fire is really important to a healthy environment in which we live. I would also just add that I think that it might be a little mistaken to simplify down to what the utility is doing to just mitigating to avoid ignition. The mitigations that they're doing also do have a mitigating effect for other potential ignitions, right? So and I'll just give a few examples. So the fuels treatment work that they're doing around their rights of way potentially also mitigate other ignition sources turning into more catastrophic fire. So there's some potential benefit there. They also are doing tons of mitigation around situational awareness that is adding a capacity to the overall state to identify other ignition fires and be able to bring resources to respond appropriately to those fires. They're also in their system hardening. The mitigations they're doing, such as undergrounding, would mean that regardless of the fact that they've also mitigated their potential for creating an ignition, but they are also mitigating against other fires moving through that community, that fire would potentially hit the grid and have other public safety impacts on that community because of the fire that moved through, where now that grid will be more resilient to allowing fire to pass over that landscape and not have a direct impact on the grid, as well as hardening with fire retardant material on their lines to, even in quick fast moving fires, be able to potentially blow through underneath their lines and not have an impact. So I don't think that it's accurate to say that the work that they're doing is just about eliminating their own ignitions, but that there is a broader benefit to the overall of wildfire resilience of communities in the billions of dollars that they're investing. So because of all that, I would continue to advocate that I think that these two paragraphs that we have in this paper have a role in the paper.
Go ahead, Dave.
I
just checking to see if Anthony's hand was still. Go ahead, Dave.
I think there are 3 points you made. And one had to do with the value of fuel breaks or fuel modification along right of ways, which I agree with. That ought to be accounted for, but is already addressed within the overarching methodology. And then the last point was things that would reduce damage to utility infrastructure, like painting poles with retardant. Well, after fires run through, there is no risk of ignition because the fire's already burned through, even regardless of where it was caused. So I don't think that's particularly relevant to this topic. But then the middle one, the ignition reduction, I think is fundamentally different. So if we unpack those 3 different things, the first one, I see nothing wrong with calling out work that's being done and mandated that is probably, or I assume, being done to reduce the probability of a utility ignition becoming a damaging fire, but has intended or unintended benefits for reducing the spread of fire caused by someone else across those lines. We've made great use of that in this area where we have a lot of transmission lines, and we've been able to leverage work that PG&E is doing, CPUC work that PG&E is doing, to tie in with other work we're doing as a community. I think that's spot on and ought to be accounted for, but largely is through CalMapper and others. I just, once I said, once again, Yana, you probably know off the top of your head, I don't. Of those 5,400 or so average ignitions, how many are utility caused? And if the utility caused ignitions were eliminated from the landscape, how many of those other ignitions would have the potential for the same outcome? And I just don't know, but I've seen a couple of instances where there were multiple ignition points on that day because things were primed, it was dry, wind was blowing. And I just don't know whether or not eliminating the utility ignitions would fundamentally alter the outcomes, or whether other ignitions would just fill that gap.
I would have a hard time defending that viewpoint in front of the communities of paradise, I'll tell you that much. I'd have a hard time defending that in Santa Rosa. Melissa reports there that 10% of all wildfires are, from utility ignited.
It was a question, not a statement. I don't know. So I'm not saying that one's not
Melissa
the other.
threw out the number 10%, but
I think
that's just a good point. I don't know why
Doug, please jump in if our team got it wrong, but we work really closely with CAL FIRE. And my understanding is that we grabbed that number. So it's approximately 10%. It's hovered around that for the last several years. Sometimes it's 8, 9, sometimes it's 11. So Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's why we said approximately 10. That's where it's been hovering. But the issue is that the consequence of those fires does have an outsized impact on the community. So those 10% have a disproportionate representation in the most destructive and deadly fires.
Is there a number? So 10% of wildfires got it. But what's the far greater proportion? Is there a percentage that goes with that?
Far greater proportion of what? The consequence?
Well, yeah, the sentence uses an approximate number, and then it moves to
far greater proportion. So I can get the specifics numbers. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but we've taken that line, actually, I think, from some presentations that CAL FIRE has done, and they are more than a majority of I think it's 6, but I could be wrong, more than a significant, I'm sorry to say not majority, but a significant portion of the most catastrophic fires defined by CAL FIRE's top 20 the largest fires, destructive fires, and deadly fires. So those are the 3 big lists, and utility fires are disproportionately represented on those lists. And I believe that's where that phrasing came from.
Okay. Yeah, I think
go ahead. I think it would be helpful. Like I said, I don't know enough to be able to have an opinion on this, other than to say the way this is written, to me, it would be more helpful if it said 10% of ignitions are utility caused, resulting in, and then I wouldn't go number of fires. I don't think that's very useful. I would instead look at number of homes destroyed as a result of these 10% of fires. So if it's 10% of fires and it's resulted in 51% of the homes destroyed, that feels like a really compelling case to make your point. I would recommend that we move to be as specific as possible if that data, which I assume is available, so that we can. If this is a point that ought to be made, it can be made in a way where the defense occurs in the same paragraph.
Yeah. So we have just about 8 minutes left. So this is a really good conversation. I was trying to pose a question for the group. So we have in the next. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just going to respond to Dave's comment in terms of the suggested edit. I'm fully supportive of that. I think we can get some numbers to really quantify that so that it's not just making a broad statement of greater proportion, but put some numbers behind it.
Right. Well, what does the group think about this part of it with some cleanup actually being moved into section 5, which is how can models be used to drive mitigations? That's really what your office is doing, right? Using the risk model to drive mitigations. I think there's further discussion which I, that this group, we probably really need to talk a little bit more. The last sentence in there is a little hard to say that if a utility company didn't harden their infrastructure in your community, you have a higher level of risk out the gate than anybody else. I think that last sentence says that you need to say that they're trying to include hardened utility infrastructure as a piece that must go in a risk model, right? I think that's a little different conversation than taking this, which fits really well, I think, in the way majority of it is written, is how a model can be used to drive mitigations in our utility industry, which I think is a really good example in California of how a risk model is being used to do that. That's just a thought. I don't know what other folks thinks are as a think about or a place to put it.
So I'm certainly not opposed to that. In terms of the last sentence and the last comment, I wonder though, I mean, the utilities do, based on their mitigations, and once they harden an area, that does drive their not just probability of ignition risk, but also because they also model consequence down, right? So I guess I'm just pausing a little bit,
right?
I'm pausing a little bit on if we're thinking about this more from a holistic community perspective, and let's say the community has done everything that they should do, right? Is the group suggesting, or is the thought that it doesn't matter whether your grid that's embedded in that community is hardened or not hardened?
Because excuse me, to Dave's point, it becomes a ignition source. It's not something that's transferring fire from parcel to parcel once you have a fire, or increasing the community risk because they are or aren't. If there's a fire burning towards a community, does it matter at that point whether the infrastructure is hardened or not?
Well, if it's underground, if at least when the fire comes through, they'd keep the power on and get their alerts.
But it's not changing the risk.
That's life safety,
right?
which is not part of this report.
Yeah. Those are the kind of
You're
things
trying to mitigate. Mitigation is to reduce the impact of when something comes through, right? So how does? So yeah, I guess again, I haven't been part of the earlier conversation, so
yeah.
Apologies. But how is that not mitigating or building the overall resilience of the community to that potential ignition or an ignition happening and fire coming through?
I was up front. I mean, this obviously a month ago, a year ago, whatever. The discussion was that this report is not dealing with life safety and evacuation concerns. This is focused on the wildfire, the propagation of wildfire across the landscape.
Mm-hmm. So basically, it's talking about mitigation solely to prevent the fire from continuing to be able to move. Like that's how you guys are framing this?
Yeah, or cause damage to structures. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we got 3 minutes left. I don't want to take anybody. Now you see why, Caroline, this document's taking a little while for the group to get back to the WMAC. Anyway, we are about out of time, and we can continue this discussion. We'll do the other cleanup on the other items. So I will get with you, Nancy and Yana, to work on those. And we, there any other discussion? Again, I hate to cut everybody off, but we'll continue like we have before. Any other roundtable discussion for the group?
So this is Deborah. I am not going to be at the next meeting. I'm going to be on vacation. So I just had, I think, one last comment that I think we can resolve in the 30 seconds, which is,
okay,
it just sort of, yeah, I think I can do it. So this is talking about CDI's own regulations. I just provided a little bit of alternative language. I think I probably provided the original language, but this is more along the lines of what our comms department wants. So it shouldn't cause any heartburn to anyone.
Okay. Perfect. So let's just mark it and then we'll get it added in, or you can
Awesome.
add it in now and then we can clean it up. So everybody can review it either way you want to do it.
Thanks.
All right. So that'll be in there for the group to review when we get the document back out. Any roundtable discussion? Yana?
I just got a little lost there. Are we gonna not do any edits until we meet again and pick up from where we
Nope.
haven't finished, or can we do the cleanup on the front end that we've walked through? Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I also
100%.
just ask for clarification on just the conversation we had? Should we take the time between meetings just to make those, putting some specifics on quantification of catastrophic? And then also propose moving it down into that other section? Should we take a stab at that? Or do you
Yeah,
want to keep
absolutely,
talking before we?
Caroline. You and I can get together and we can talk about it or work with
Okay.
Yana. Yeah. The tricky part about this group is there can't be more than 3 people talk about an item together. So it makes it really hard to edit.
Got it. So Yana, you were the one talking with Melissa, right?
Yeah, but
Yeah, okay.
basically I just offered to try and help create some consistent language through here. So I don't mean to insert myself where people don't want it, but just like a fresh eye, since I didn't write
Yeah,
major
no,
sections of it.
Very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, because it has to be such small groups, we kind of tear off in little groups to work on things and bring it back to the big groups. So, yeah, have to manage the process. Okay, is there any other discussion for roundtable? Yana, your hand still, yep, you're good. Okay. Is there any public comment? We have some public on. Okay, not seeing any. Upcoming dates, next meeting, August 23rd from 1:30 to 3:30. Then we have a scheduled meeting August 29th, from 11 to 1. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to
Nancy's
adjourn.
gone, so I'll motion. Story.
Okay,
Second.
sorry. Okay. Who's second?
Robert.
Oh, Robert. Okay, thank you. All right. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of adjourn, aye?
Hi.
Hi.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, seeing none, motion passed unanimously. So we'll go ahead and end the call and thank you, everybody.